Let's talk about the cards that have been murdered by March of the Lich King. And what does it mean to be murdered? Well, in this case, it really just means that a card has been eclipsed by a new modern card in one way or another. So they share a similar design, but that design has been improved or evolved upon, perhaps changed into a different class. And maybe it fits that class a little better than a different class. Or perhaps just made stronger. The numbers got bigger. Or maybe there's some tweak or context that makes the card far more interesting of a design compared to the old version. So this is not just strictly a video about power creep. In fact, it's rarely ever a video about power creep. Instead, we're just comparing cards over time. For instance, the Lingering Zombie here compared to the Possessed Villager. Now we have a card that just gives you 3 1/1 bodies instead of 2. So this is, of course, both stronger right off the bat, but also I think a more interesting design for a couple of reasons. Number one, the undead minion type being added here offers some interesting design space because you care about undead minions dying in undead synergy cards. So having a minion that's sticking around for multiple turns there gives you more opportunities to make sure that you're going to be actually triggering that undead synergy effect that other cards might have. Beyond that, it just really plays nicely to the sticky token style of play that Druid in particular can utilize so well, but also Zoo Warlock used well with Possessed Villager back in the day, where having minions around to absorb buffs is a really nice advantage. So Lingering Zombie really does just do what Possessed Villager did well, and really I think expands on it in those 2 different ways. Is Lingering Zombie too good? Is this an example of power creep? No, I don't think so, actually. Token Druid has been a solid deck this expansion, but it is certainly not a power outlier. It's not, ruining the meta or anything, and Lingering Zombie does not feel like a power outlier in that deck. In fact, I think some versions of the deck don't even run the Lingering Zombie. There are versions that just cut it. So it's good, it's solid, it's a great option, but it is by no means too powerful, despite being better than a card that was once pretty good in its era as well. So next up, this comparison I think offers some cool insights into Death Knight's design. We've got Soul Stealer here, which is just a way better version of Twisting Nether, because you, of course, still get the effect of destroying all minions, but you get a 5/5, so you get a little bit of board presence, swing there on board, and you get corpses as well, so you get this secondary resource generation that can also be really helpful for Death Knights. And that is a major jump in power from a card that was always good. Twisting Nether's been a card that's been played across various eras of Hearthstone as one of the staple, iconic mass removal sorts of cards. So you see Soul Stealer, if you showed this to somebody, 6 years ago, they'd be like, oh my God, what? That's insane. Nowadays, it feels a little more reasonable, and it's a pretty important context to consider too, because this is a triple rune card. And what that means is the way they designed Death Knight to use the rune system and have some limitations in place, you needed to have these big rewarding cards to make it worth running triple rune decks. And in fact, it turned out they're all so rewarding that we don't really run any other kinds of decks. But Soul Stealer is one of those big payoff cards, and this is one of the reasons it's worth it to commit to a full rune package. So it has this restriction in place. So because of that lack of flexibility, because they're able to design carefully in that space where they know they can limit the total available number of powerful cards for triple blood decks, you can push each individual card a little bit further. Whereas a general use card that you can put into any deck, if it's too good, there might be other things that open up too many powerful opportunities down the road. Whereas this is an easier one to keep a lid on, basically. So yeah, it's much better, but that's a cool function of the rune system in Death Knight, I think, and makes advancements like this one totally okay and actually fairly interesting from a design space standpoint. So next up, we've got Twisted Tether versus Assassinate, and Assassinate is one of the most commonly appearing cards in these videos because it always seems to get evolved upon. And with Twisted Tether here for Warlock, now you get to destroy a minion for 4 mana, but you also get to give its stats to a random undead in your hand. So some really significant potential upside here with the Twisted Tether. Remove an 8/8 and you get this monster hand buff basically as a bonus over a card like Assassinate. You've also here got some shadow synergy stuff with the spell School. So a couple different ways this card murders Assassinate, if you will. And I think this is actually really cool design evolution because number one, Assassinate sucks. It's just not good enough. 4 mana is too expensive for this sort of effect. So you have to make the card better for it to be relevant in Hearthstone today. Twisted Tether does that, but it does it in a way that has a deck building encouragement because it's only going to buff undead. So you could put this in a deck and it could just be an Assassinate if you don't have undead in your deck to reap the benefit of the Twisted Tether, or perhaps even if one's not in hand. So at a base level, it's 1-to-1 basically. But as you start to layer in these synergies and bonuses, Twisted Tether becomes a more interesting card. And again, this kind of helps control the power level a little bit of Twisted Tether because they can make sure, okay, look, we can't print like an undead with charge that goes in Warlock, for instance, because that might be crazy with Twisted Tether hand buffs. So they again have more ways to influence and control how the power spikes of these cards might be utilized and limit them a little bit. So you can improve the card, you can make it more powerful, but without things getting out of hand or getting out of control, which again, I think is a really cool evolution of some base sort of reliable cards like Assassinate, taking them to the next level, giving them some deck design encouragements, and that makes the game a little bit more fun and interesting across all those angles. All right, so next up is Last Stand versus Predatory Instincts. 2 cards you've probably never thought about. I just started trying to make a Last Stand deck work. Predatory Instincts, man, this is a Rastakon's Rumble card. Very forgettable. I think some people technically played it with like Undasta and stuff, but it was never really good, of course. And Last Stand certainly hasn't proven to be very useful yet either. But I thought this was interesting how both of these are drawing for a specific kind of thing. So they're tutoring a specific sort of minion, and they're both got a doubling effect. But Last Stand went ahead and said, no, we're just going to double all of the stats as opposed to just the health, which clearly that's much better. Can help make a threat on board and not just a big, sticky body. And I think in particular the taunt aspect of this is pretty cool because that's the sort of thing you want to have big stats, an effect that forces your opponent to interact in some way. Beasts in particular for Druid maybe don't benefit quite as much from that health. You could of course get a taunted beast and sort of replicate the same idea, but it doesn't feel quite as flavorful or thematic as doubling a taunt does, which feels better to me. So a couple different evolutions for this one. Interestingly, despite this card looking way better, it's still not good, still not a powerful card at all. This probably needs to be 3 mana to really feel like a good card. So whatever it is about this 4 mana single draw, it's just not enough upside to make that cost worth it. Both of these proved to be just too slow. So they could probably go ahead and murder this one a little harder and push things a little further if they really wanted to get played. So this next comparison's pretty spicy. The Magister's Apprentice here has murdered the Sorcerer's Apprentice, which is now a 4 mana card. But of course, we all know that's not really a murder because the Sorcerer's Apprentice used to be a 2 mana card. And the Magister's Apprentice is very clearly an homage to the Sorcerer's Apprentice, but it's one that's limited specifically to arcane spells. And I think that's a really important evolution. Again, clearly, Sorcerer's Apprentice at 2 mana hitting every spell was just too powerful. Time and time again, it proved to be absurd. That's why they finally doubled its mana cost to reduce all the crazy things you could do with this card, limit all that. And the Magister's Apprentice comes in. They want to explore that same design space with reducing mana costs of cards, but by putting that limiter on it, by saying it's only arcane spells, again, they can design around that to make sure things don't get too out of hand. I'm frankly still worried things will get out of hand. There are still some crazy things you could do with arcane cards, but at least this gives them those levers again to make sure that they can fix it, they can cap it, they can design away from it if needed. So limiting the power of the Apprentice, whereas before it was totally uncapped in how crazy it could get. So this is kind of a reverse murder in a way. This card's actually worse than the OG Sorcerer's Apprentice, better than the current Sorcerer's Apprentice, arguably at least more specific. But I thought this comparison, even if it's a little backwards, was definitely an important one to showcase nonetheless, because I think the design of this is much better, even if the power level is lower. Because remember, murdering cards is not just about power level. So next up, this is a pretty fun comparison. We got Underking versus Ancient Shield Bearer. If you remember this card back in the days of Cthulhu Warrior, which was actually a really good deck and honestly one of my all-time favorite decks, I think. You'd get your Cthulhu up and you'd get 10 armor, and man, you'd be over the moon. Sometimes you'd have Bran and get 20 armor, and it was like, what? This is insane. And it felt really good back in the days. And now with Under King, you're getting 12 armor total off this card, but you're also getting a rush minion. So you can take those immediate trades, respond to your opponent's threats right away. And of course, that's way better to have that instant reactivity to make sure you don't fall behind on board. And you're just getting more armor total as well. So this card's faster and has higher total output. Also has an undead tag, which probably isn't as important as a 7-drop, but maybe not irrelevant. Now, of course, Warrior is a class that has ways to use armor, so this could do things like enable a shield slam. And used to, I would have said, you know, oh, that's cool, because Druid's gonna have a hard time using this armor. It's just life. It's not turning into anything else. But of course, with the armor Druid package, they got ways to use armor. A limited amount, sure, but Anubrakan can turn this armor into tempo later. So actually, it is also a relevant synergistic thing for the armor here too, not just actually health. And what that means is, you know, Under King is less restrictive, more reactive, and of course, just bigger numbers in total with armor. Also has more synergies to explore with Death Rattle and Undead. So this has definitely evolved on the Ancient Shield Bearer in a handful of different ways. And of course, Druid can do some scary stuff with cards like this one. So all in all, you know, I love both these cards. Nothing away from Shield Bearer here. It's all my all-time favorite decks and cards, but still has definitely been eclipsed a little bit here by the Under King. So next up here, we've got Vampiric Blood compared to Flash of Light. And there were probably a couple different 2-mana healing cards you could have gone to here, but I like Flash of Light because it restored a little health and it drew a card, which really is what you're trying to get out of Vampiric Blood. You're hoping to get at least 5 health and probably 10 and drawing a card off of it. So when things go well and you've got the corpses to spend, Vampiric Blood is the same cost, but twice as much health on top of that. And of course, this is plus health. It's not healing. So you can go above your max health total with Vampiric Blood, which is obviously an enormous upside. Sometimes you'd have to play Flash of Light on full health. You'd lose the value of the heal. Vampiric Blood, you're getting the health anyway. And that can be a great bonus, helping you stay out of range of OTKs and so on. So functionally heal and that boost is nice. And again, we can go back to comparing this as a triple blood card like we did before. That allows cards like this to be more powerful because of those limitations put in place. But also for this one, it has that secondary requirement of having to spend corpses. So there's even another layer of control placed on top of this card, making sure that you have to have the right things in place for this one to line up. So it sacrifices some flexibility, perhaps some consistency in exchange for all of this power level over a card like Flash of Light, for instance, which is probably a totally fine exchange. Vampiric Blood is very good. Feels like one of the most powerful cards in Blood Death Knights, but it's really one of the only things keeping them in the fight right now, keeping these decks competitive. So it's probably important for cards like this to be this powerful and push the envelope this far. So next up here, this one's a pretty drastic murder, I would say. Unleash Fel, the new Demon Hunter spell. Deals 1 damage to all enemies, and then if you wait long enough, you get Lifesteal. Remember that used to be Mana Thirst 4 when this card was printed. Has since been nerfed to Mana Thirst 6. And there are a couple, or actually 3 different cards here I've listed that all kind of had a similar idea, but Unleash Fel has evolved past them in different ways. So Shooting Star, for instance, for Mage, that dealt damage to minions and only immediately adjacent minions. And of course, Mage had some ways to buff that up with spell damage, so sometimes it would scale really nicely with spell damage, but so does Demon Hunter. Demon Hunter actually has been using Unleash Fel in the exact same way. So not only are they hitting potentially more minions, but also getting face damage as well, while using the same sort of contextual upside that Shooting Star had back in the day. And then we got Fellscream Blast for Demon Hunter. Of course, that's a previous evolution of previous murdering. Fellscream Blast actually kind of murdered Shooting Star in a way because it added Lifesteal to the same effect. Also, by the way, those texts are inconsistent, of course. So that felt like a big advancement. Man, getting Lifesteal on this is really nice, and that could also, of course, benefit from spell damage. And we've also seen Fellscream Blast used with things like Il'gynoth as well. So basically, Unleash Fel has gotten cheaper. It's gone face as an addition, and it's added Lifesteal over Shooting Star or to match Fellscream Blast, and that means it's just a better card in a variety of different ways, and it's been a very powerful card so far. In Demon Hunter, of course, already getting nerfed and powering some of these Spell Demon Hunter and Quest Demon Hunter stuff, giving them sometimes basically a Reno Jackson effect almost, where they're clearing the opponent's board with some spell damage, dealing 3 to various things, and healing for like 15, 18 health on occasion, and healing back to full, all for 1 mana, which these other cards, of course, did not have that crazy swing potential. Fellscream Blast kind of could, but wouldn't go face. This one actually does tend a little more towards that concerning level of power creep, where these cards were decent in their time, and Unleash Fel has advanced to that power level quite a bit. And Demon Hunter using this successfully at the top of the meta, already getting nerfed. This might have been pushed just a little bit too far compared to these other ones. But after the nerf and with the shakeup of the meta, this card's starting to look a little more reasonable and healthy as opposed to completely insanely strong. And there you go, folks. Those are the murdered cards for March of the Lich King. Curious what you guys think about these. Which of these do you think are healthy evolutions? Which are perhaps not so healthy? I'm curious to hear those thoughts and more. If you have any other cool insights to share, of course, excited to see those in the comments. If you have other card comparisons you'd like to toss out, of course, happy to read those too. So all that said, thanks much as always for watching. Look forward to those comments, and until next time, game on.